Hello and welcome to the program. Nigeria has begun its 60th year journey post-independence. The anniversary ceremony, which was marked in a low-key, saw colorful performances and a military parade at the Eagle Square in Abuja, the nation's capital. As it is every year, the president also delivered a national address highlighting the journey so far, as well as successes and goals towards achieving a better Nigeria. Now, one of the key takeaways from President Muhammadu Buhari's speech is his announcement of adjusted petroleum prices in the country, which he justified with an illustration comparing the price of fuel in Nigeria with those of neighboring countries. In the president's words, it makes no sense for oil to be cheaper in Saudi Arabia than in Nigeria. Now, President Buhari also took cognizance of some of the socio-economic policies of his administration, which he says outweigh that of past administrations. For the current challenges, the president says most of them will be resolved if the nation remains committed and united. Now, days before the independence anniversary, the Federal Executive Council approved a budget of 13.08 trillion naira for 2021. Of course, that's in keeping with the decision of the government to unveil its budget before the end of the year and to achieve a January now to December budget cycle. Now, it's an ambitious budget by every means, and it's got a lot of people talking. Joining me now to discuss more on the president's speech as well as the budget, as well as the nation's growth now at 60 is Johnson Chukwu, who is the Managing Director of Kari Asset Management and Investment Bank in Lagos. He joins us from Victoria Island in Lagos. Mr. Chukwu, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Let me start by asking you, reading through the president's speech, one of the things he talked about is the challenge of lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty over the next, over the next 10 years or so. How challenging would that be for the country?
Thank you, DEJI, for having me. Well, it's going to be a tough call because if you see if you consider the fact that the economy has been growing at a rate that is below the population growth rate. In fact, this year we are dealing with an economic contraction or recession. In the second quarter of this year, the economy contracted by more than 6%. And all things being equal, even the federal government is making the provision that the economy will contract even with the stimulus of about 2.3 trillion naira that they want to inject into the economy. So in effect, we are going to see at the end of this year, more people pushed into poverty. So if the recovery has to take place, it will start by next year. And if you consider that Nigeria has one of the highest number of extremely poor people, Nigeria is now called the poverty capital of the world. So first of all, you have to limit the rate at which the country population is going into poverty. And then you have to see an economic growth rate that's not just in terms of numbers, but also leads to a lot more people being positively affected. So you are looking at what are those growth rates, what kind of growth rate and what kind of structure of the economy will you have that will ensure that it's all encompassing, the growth is all encompassing. So you are seeing more people improve their standard of living. But for a start, we have to look at our economic structures. And I think one of the reasons why our economy has not been growing well, because we are focused on the wrong things. We had focused on handouts. We've focused on giving people palliatives instead of creating opportunities for people to get employed. So I think the government needs to change its orientation and focus on creating an enabling environment that will lead to productive activity so that more and more people will get gainfully employed and they will have incomes that will sustain them and their families. The idea of giving handouts to families, feeding school children, in as much as it's not completely wrong, will not take people out of poverty, because once you finish that meal, you have to look forward to another meal. But the key thing is that we must have an economy that is working, that is producing goods and services, and that people are employed and people are generating their revenues and income instead of depending on government handouts.
Now, I know this is going to be a very tough one for you, but I want you to be, to try to be as brief as you can and then make sense as well. 60 years post-independence, how would you assess the Nigerian economy? Are we where we should be? What do you think has gone wrong and what do we need to fix?
Well, we all agree. I mean, virtually everybody in Nigeria. I've not seen anybody who has said that our economy we've done well economically. We've seen a lot of retrogression in terms of economic performance as a country. We've seen many countries that were in the same position we saw leapfrog us and now considered as among the first world countries. So in summary, we have not done well. It is beyond begging the issue for anybody to imagine that we have done well, given the standard of living of the country, given that close to 100 million Nigerians are living in abject poverty, given that we have not been able to eradicate some of the easily communicable diseases, given that we have more than 13 to 14 million children, out-of-school children in the country. I can go on and on. Using any of the parameters that are used to measure the performance of countries, Nigeria has not made the standard of its citizens.
And for you, if you were talking to the government, what are those things that you think we need to begin to change, to get the economy on the right path? Of course, subsidy, the government is doing away with that. That's just one. But certainly, there are other things the government would need to do to get this economy working for everyone and to be able to achieve that lofty goal now of getting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years?
Well, the first thing is, like I said, beyond eliminating the wastages in public expenditure, like you mentioned, the issue of subsidy on petroleum products, subsidy on electricity, we also need to have a slimmer government. If you review the recurrent expenditure of the government in the past 4 years, you will observe that we have seen a significant growth in recurrent expenditure at a period when revenues are shrinking. So we cannot continue to build a very big government that is a bureaucrat that is unproductive when other countries are moving towards slimmer government. If you have a slimmer government, you're going to save a lot of resources that are currently committed to meeting the recurrent expenditure of the government. That's one. Two, we need to restructure our economy. And restructuring the economy, we need to build the supporting infrastructure, the enabling laws, the enabling regulations that will allow private sector to be in the commanding height of economic activities. One of which could be the issue of ownership and operation of the upstream sector of the economy, of the oil and gas sector. The petroleum industry bill, we need to look at that. The original bill had actually specified we should have incorporated joint ventures between the government and the international oil company. We need to look at that aspect. Three, we need to look at how to improve the standard of living of Nigerians, how to improve the quality of education, how to improve the curriculum of educational curriculum in the country. We need an educational system that will develop and train the right quality of labor that will drive economic growth. Countries that have done well economically, like China in the recent past, has an educational system that emphasizes technical competencies, technical skills. And that's why virtually all the companies in the world that are into big manufacturing had to move their manufacturing activity into China, beyond the fact they have a large population. We are seeing other countries like Malaysia adopt the same approach. We are seeing Philippines. We're seeing manufacturing activity moving to Philippines. We're seeing manufacturing activities moving to some of the Southeast Asian countries that are now beginning to emerge as major hubs for manufacturing activities. Our policies must be that oriented.
Now, let's quickly talk about the budget. And, just before that, you did talk about running a slimmer government. And it makes complete sense when you consider the fact that over the week we had a lawmaker coming out to say that what members of the House of Representatives collect, and there are actually 360 members in that house, is about 13 million naira. So when you do the mathematics, you can imagine how much we're spending to keep to maintain our members of the House of Representatives, not to talk of the ones you have in the Senate. And then you also have each state having their own House of Assembly, and the members there, of course, would have to be paid and paid handsomely. So I can but agree with you that we need a slimmer government. But let's quickly talk about the budget now. The 2021 budget, it's a good thing that the government has now announced that the president may be presenting the budget now to the National Assembly next week. It's a good thing that the budget is coming out at this time of the year, and the government is determined to maintain the January to December budget cycle. But you look at the figures, 13.08 trillion. It's of course about a 17% rise when compared to the 2020 budget that we're currently running. But this is also coming at a time when, we're seeing shortage of revenue by as high as 60%. So the question is, how realistic do you think this budget is?
Well, I think that budget is overly optimistic. Cast your mind back to where we are coming from. In the current year, the government said by the end of June, they've only achieved 60% of their revenue projections. Well, as the current expenditure is about 92%. Out of that 92%, the capital expenditure was only 60% in terms of achievement. So if you are looking at this year, and I don't see how much as much change we're going to see next year. The government is projecting crude production about 1.86 million barrels. Yeah, about 500,000 will be condensate, about 1.46, about 1.5, about 1.5, will be crude. But beyond that, they also are projecting about $40 per barrel. If you look at $40 and look at their production volumes, that looks realistic. But beyond the revenue from oil, the major revenues will be coming from other sources of other independent sources, which I think will be difficult to achieve. Revenues from customs, revenues from Nigerian port authorities, and government enterprises. I do not think the economy would have sufficiently recovered as to lead to achievement of the budget provisions. In the previous year, we've seen budget deficits as high as 4 trillion naira. So if you are moving to a revenue projection about 7.5 trillion, I think that would be highly optimistic. And they're also making a provision about 4.45 trillion in deficit, which by the time the government say they are budgeting about 29% for capital expenditure, this simply means that for that any amount to be spent on capital expenditure, we must achieve the budget projections. And I think that would be a tall order, which simply means that we will end up just incurring the current expenditure and sometimes possibly borrowing to meet some of the recurrent expenditure. I think the government needs to be more realistic in its projections. And if it does that, it will also help us to review our approach to managing our public finance or building infrastructure. I've emphasized time and time again that the government does not have the revenue profile to continue to build infrastructure from budgetary allocations. We've seen this fail severally. You've seen the number of years it's taken us to get the second Niger bridge to just about 30 to 40% completion. At the current rate of allocation, we may spend another 10 years building that bridge. Look at how long it's taken us to rebuild the Lagos-Ibadan Express Road. And not to talk of the other highways that are now in dilapidated conditions. So my approach has been, if the revenue profile is weak, why don't we identify those commercially viable corridors and concession them to the private sector? That will not take away the infrastructure from us. All we just need is to pay tolls to use those facilities. And if government has money, they can build trunk B roads parallel to them where those who don't want to pay toll can afford to use. But reality is that we as a country do not have the revenue profile to build infrastructure. And until we realize that by adjusting the budget to be more realistic, if we have a budget that is not realistic, we may not have the strong feeling that we cannot build infrastructure as it stands today.
Let me just quickly ask you this before I let you go. The projection that there's a projection of 3% GDP growth, and then looking at inflation coming down to less than 12%, around 11 point something percent. You think those are achievable?
Well, I think inflation will moderate, but economic growth rate of about 3 to 5%, which they are projecting, also is an optimistic projection. If we if you consider since 2016, when the economy went into recession, the economy has not grown at 3%. In 2017, when the economy recovered, it only grew by 0.82%. In 2018, was just 1.91%. And in 2019, it was just about 2.25%. So, and 2019, you could actually say was one of the best years for the economy, because that year, crude production was in the region of 2 million barrels per day, and average crude price was $64 per barrel. You don't expect to have that in the next few years. So I do not know what basis that the government is assuming or projecting a GDP growth rate of between 3 and 5%.
And from what you can see, it's obvious that we're still going to borrow to fund part of that budget.
Yes, absolutely. If you even look at the public finances of the government is borrowing to fund the recurrent expenditure. Every kobo that the government said it has spent on infrastructure is borrowed. And as we speak now, we're also seeing a ballooning of our debt service in relation to our revenue. So we will be struggling to earn enough revenue to even service our debt and pay a fraction of our recurrent expenditure, which I also said earlier has also increased. So talk less of the capital component. So clearly, these coming years will also see us increasing our debt profile.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, the Chief Executive Officer of Cowrie Asset Management, an investment bank based in Lagos. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.
I will take a short break and we'll be right back to continue the discussion. On DEJI360, we don't just ask the questions. What is wrong with amending the Constitution the way the National Assembly members have been doing it? We seek answers.
Constitution is constituent. Our problem is not lack of laws. Our problem is lack of the willpower to implement our laws.
Answers that provide clarity.
While we negotiate, we should try to make it a point that the girls must be complete.
The clarity you need to make informed judgment so that you can make the right decision and take action. People are saying it is you politicians that are responsible for this, that you are the reason why this is happening.
All these dollars that call themselves governors in this country.
I wish we had people like Tony at the National Assembly.
God forbid that I go to join that band.
DEJI360, providing clarity to issues.